Welcome back to basketball and back to another edition of the Midweek Mid-Range. My name is Parker Ainsworth, and I'm your host, and we're welcoming our first special guest of sorts, another Belly Up podcaster with Score Zags Score. Andy Patton is here to tell us all about the Zags. How you doing, Andy?
I'm good, Parker. Thank you so much for having me on, man. I'm excited about this.
For sure. I'm excited too. I'm not actually watching for West Coast people out there tuning in, the Lakers are the marquee game right now, the ESPN game. They're playing the Wizards. The score looks like that's been a fun game. I guess it just jumped out to about 13. I've been watching the Knicks. The Knicks Bulls is a fun one for me. I mean, maybe it's because I'm thinking it's the 90s all over again, but I've been having fun with this one. RJ Barrett's a lot of fun. You had a chance to watch it tonight, or just get home? I guess it's earlier out there.
It's a little earlier out here, but I did watch a little bit of the Lakers-Wizards game, like you talked about, partly for my guy Rui Hachimura. He dunked all over Anthony Davis. I don't know if you saw that highlight. It just happened a few minutes ago, but it's AD's first game back, and Rui just let him know. He welcomed him back in style. It was a fun one.
He can do that. I think people don't expect it out of him. No. Between playing in Gonzaga and now Washington, I don't know how much national TV time he's gotten, but he can do that. All right, so Andy, first, I guess I wanted to let you introduce yourself, talk to us about you and Gonzaga. And this is not the only team you've covered in depth, but tell us some more about yourself, man.
Yeah, so I was a sports writer. I still am a sports writer. I was doing it full time, I suppose. I covered the Seattle Seahawks for a couple of years for USA Today. I covered the USC Trojans for a couple of years for USA Today, or for about a year. And then obviously I've had this Gonzaga podcast kind of as a side thing since 2019. I think I counted the Zags are 62-3. Since I started the podcast. It's been a fun couple of years to have a podcast about the team. So yeah, I've had a handful of different roles. I've written for a variety of other sites as well. Pitcher List covering fantasy baseball, Fansided for a couple of years as well. Just kind of done the freelance life for a few years. Got myself a regular job now, which isn't quite as fun, but still get a chance to do stuff like this. Still get to come on shows. And the Gonzaga podcast, we're about 160 episodes in now. I've been with Belly Up for a little under a year, I think, that I've been with the network. So it's been so much fun, and it's a fantastic pod that I've put a lot of labor into. I've been doing 3 episodes a week. Still, even after the season, I'll cut down eventually. But there's a lot of fun things to talk about with Gonzaga. So I've had a lot of good times doing that.
So tell me about. So you're a Pacific Northwest guy. The Twitter handle is at Andy Patton PNW. Like that is very much who you identify as. But you're not a UW guy, not a Wazoo guy, not a. I mean, I guess you could go down and go to like Oregon State. So talk to me. Why the Zags?
Well, I went to Gonzaga, so that's the top reason there. I grew up a Ducks fan because I grew up in Oregon, just outside of Portland. So I grew up a Ducks fan. And that for college football, I still don't really have a team. Like this past year, I rooted for USC because I was covering them, and it's more fun when they win when you write about a team. But
no, that's fair.
Yeah. So, but then they lost the Ducks, and I was like, I don't know how I'm supposed to feel. Like I don't feel anything really. Like it's just, when you go to a school like Gonzaga, you kind of don't follow as much college football. I still watch it; it's still a great sport, but. I grew up watching the Ducks. I had a teammate in high school who played for the Ducks for a while, so that kind of made me have more of a rooted interest while I was at Gonzaga. But then I just, fell in love with the basketball program. They weren't quite as good when I was there. Actually, I know we'll talk about him because of your hat, but my senior year was the year that Kelly Olynyk really broke out. That was the first time they were number 1 in the country. And going into that year, man, they, everybody kept saying like, oh, Kelly's going to be the guy. And he'd just come off a redshirt year. And everybody was like, why would he be the guy? And it was an incredible season to be there and to see what the program has done since then. That was the first time they were number 1 ranked and first time they were a number 1 seed. And now it kind of feels like old hat for them to get there and be in that spot. And it's been an incredible run for the team for the past few years. And I'm happy to have a voice in that community.
Well, and you mentioned there, did you say 62-3 since you've been doing the podcast? What that sounds like to me is you need to be on payroll. I think that, I think that if anyone at Gonzaga is listening, it benefits you to have Andy reporting on. I say recording. I guess it's some combination of the two, right?
Yeah.
Man, that's wild.
Yeah.
All right, and then I assumed you'd gone there, but like I went to not a smaller school, a division. I played Division 3 football, right? And so like the interesting there is like some small school people like use that as a chance to explore fandom, right? Like you can go with wherever kind of thing. At Gonzaga, that can't really be the case, right? Because you are a small school with a big time program.
I'm really glad you brought that up because I think it's a lot of the reason that there is this kind of animosity towards Gonzaga in the Pacific Northwest. It's not super prevalent, but it's there. And I was talking to a guy on Twitter who just like for no reason at all responded to something I posted about Jaylen Suggs and told me how bad the Zags are. And I was like, okay. And so
again, 62-3. They're not.
Yeah, exactly. And so he's like, well, they're going to lose in the Sweet 16, which, you know, they didn't and haven't in a long time. But I engaged anyway, because I was like, you know, let's see how this goes. And he ended up admitting like, yeah, I think the reason I don't like Gonzaga is because it feels like there's a lot of fans of Gonzaga who didn't go there. And this dude is a UW fan. And I know that he didn't go to UW, and I ended it there. I was like, this is not going to go in a good direction if we continue to talk about this. But it's like, it's widely accepted to be a fan of like a huge state school if you didn't go there. Like that's really common. And I don't think nobody bats an eye at that. But for some reason, it's not as acceptable to like people get mad if you root for Gonzaga when you didn't go there. I don't know why. I don't know, you know, and I don't think it's specific to Gonzaga exclusively. It probably happens at Xavier and Butler and all those schools as well. But it's kind of fascinating because I don't really know why people get mad at that phenomenon. I don't know.
I don't see the same animosity towards St. Mary's College, but they also don't win as often. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't think there's a bunch of Stanford and Cal fans who are all mad that people root for St. Mary's, but maybe there are. I don't know.
Yeah, they're certainly quieter about it. All right. So we're gonna jump into some hot tea, cold brew. Folks that have been tuning in the show for a while now understand hot tea, cold brew is a chance for us to go back and forth. The hot tea cold brew is brought to you by Yeti coolers, cups, and koozies. Yeti is the go-to shop for keeping things hot or cold, just like stories about basketball. Yeti's based at Austin, Texas. Check the links in our social media handles for all your insulated needs in tailgating, camping, and daily life. Yeti is built for the wild. Now, hot tea cold brew is based on this idea that like hot tea is piping hot, like, oh man, that's out there. And then cold brew is like cool, calm, just sip it. It doesn't, you don't have to like, burn your mouth with it. And Yeti cups do all that, right? Yeti keeps things hot for 6 to 8 hours and can keep things cold for up to 24. And so we're going to dive in a little bit and see which of these Gonzaga-based headlines or Gonzaga-based, I guess, phrases and sentences are hot tea or cold brew. So the first sentence, as a Houston fan myself, is hot tea, cold brew. Kelly Olynyk is the best pro from Gonzaga, right? And that's the way that goes.
Obviously, right? No, I think there's a longtime point guard from Utah who might have a little bit to say about that.
Okay, so to Andy's credit, I sent this to him and he goes, that's not right, right? And I was like, yeah, I know that's not right. But he's going crazy right now. And so before we get into the legacy of Stockton or a couple of the current guys, one of which is an all-star, talk to me about like, is this the Kelly Olynyk you as a Gonzaga fan knew was always there? Houston has not won a lot of games, but he's played tremendous the last 15 games.
Yeah, it's been incredible to see what he's done. I think he's averaging 18-9 in a Rockets uniform, something along those lines. I mean, if Houston Rockets Kelly Olynyk has a very legitimate case for being probably third, but could push for second greatest Zag of all time. He's been incredible. And what's fascinating to me about Kelly is you look at his career, like if you just go on like Basketball Reference and just look at his minutes per game, points per game, rebounds per game for his entire career, he has been extraordinarily consistent, like boringly consistent. Like his career in Boston and his career in Miami was like the same. He scored like between 9 and 11 points per game, 4 to 5 rebounds per game, played about 20 minutes per night. It didn't matter whether he was starting, whether he was coming off the bench. It didn't matter if he went through like really long lull periods where he was bad or he had really hot streaks. His season line was always like the same. And it was just kind of like, well, like when before he got traded to Houston, I was like, well, whoever signs him is going to know like exactly what they're getting. Like this is this dude. And then he does this. He gets to a new organization. He gets a little bit more playing time. Obviously that has something to do with it. But no, to answer your question, I didn't think that 18 and 10 was going to be something we saw from Kelly over this amount of time. But it's not unheard of to me. Like he's
Right.
played, like he was really good at Gonzaga. Obviously, that his one season where he really broke out was incredible. I was telling you like that I was a student at that time, and he was cramming on dudes all the time. He was shooting threes. He had like 16 post moves. Like it was incredible to watch what he could do. Gonzaga really hadn't had a big man like that I can remember. Rony Turioff wasn't quite that skilled, and he was kind of their last really great big before Kelly got there. And so I knew he would be a good NBA player, but I thought he'd settle in as a role player. And to see him shine the way that he has, especially after 7 seasons in the league, has been awesome. And I hope that, obviously Houston is a team that has an opportunity to give a guy like that a lot of playing time, because they're just kind of, they don't have a lot of other guys, but it's been fun. It's been fun to see what he's doing. And I can't tell you I would have predicted it, but I'm not shocked either.
Their systems worked well for him too. And we're going to get into some of the actual best Zags of all time, I promise. But the double drag system they're running with him, and whether it's Porter or Wall, whoever, coming off the double screen with he and Wood, Wood not only takes more attention, but whichever one rolls, the other can pop, right? Like they really offer a complementary set of skills, and his forever home may not be Houston, right? He's a free agent this summer, but something like that, I think it's interesting to see that in the modern NBA, he can really be successful. He might not get you 32 minutes and 18 and 10 a night, but proportionately, if you want to give him 25 minutes, he can really play.
Yeah. Absolutely.
The obvious answer for anyone who's actually paying attention is John Stockton, right? And so John Stockton played a lot longer ago than anyone else we're going to talk about. Like there was this big gap, it felt like, between Stockton and the modern era, if you will, of if the fewites. I don't know the proud, the few. I don't know how you call this group of guys that have followed the last 10 or 15 years. I want to say post Morrison, really, because that was like their big pop on the screen for me. Has there been a Stockton impact on the program? Did he get involved? So talk us through that, Andy. Like what did, I mean, obviously John is a Hall of Famer, career associator, et cetera. What is his impact on this college program, even though it's happened so long after he's been there?
Yeah, it's interesting because the answer to both your questions is kind of yes. Yes, he had a massive impact on the program, and he still does, but also like the success that Mark Few has had, and like that, I don't know that they're directly related to John. It's kind of a weird thing that happened. So he came to the school in the early 80s. He was born and raised in Spokane, like could throw a basketball from his house onto Gonzaga's campus. Like that's where he grew up. He still owns the house. He owns also like most of that block legitimately. He owns.
That does not surprise me.
He's a Spokane guy through and through. And so he grew up there. He played at Gonzaga Prep High School and got a little bit of attention out of high school, but wanted to stay in town and went to Gonzaga. And you read his biography and he kind of just says like, oh yeah, I was pretty good in college and then I got drafted. And it's like, okay, obviously you were better than pretty good. He also makes his NBA career sound like he just got lucky, but whatever. He's a little too modest.
All-time leader in assists, like just a little lucky. They made the best.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, what are you gonna do? So he, the Kennel Club, which is the student section for Gonzaga, they started around that time. And it had a little bit to do with him and his success. But what kind of happened after he left is he went on to have obviously a whole ton of success in the NBA, but it didn't breed a lot of success on Gonzaga's basketball team. Like in the early 90s, they were pretty bad, but they built this really dedicated fan base that stuck around through those 15 years between Stockton leaving the campus in 1999 when they finally made the NCAA tournament for the first time and started the streak. And so I think that fan base building really did help a lot, even though it wasn't, John wasn't telling them to keep going to games or anything. It just kind of kept materializing after that. And then they started to get some good players in the late 90s. Dan Monson, the coach, was really successful. And then they made their super big run in 1999. The slipper still fits, all of that. And then Monson bounced, which is what happens at almost every school that does this. Almost every school that does this. The coach bounces for, 3 times as much money or 5 times as much money, a way bigger recruiting. And you can't blame Dan Monson in 1999 for going to Minnesota and taking a huge pay raise. But then Mark Few was the lead assistant and he took over, and then they kind of pushed from there. And so John has stayed involved. His son went to Gonzaga. He played around the same time that I was there, around the same time that Kelly was there. I think he graduated in 2014. And he was good. He was more of a role player, but he was solid. He was the backup to Kevin Pangos. for most of the time that those two were there. But John was like at every game. He's still, he would have gone to games last year. Maybe he did. He would have had an invitation when most people didn't. But he's still, he's still very involved in the program and involved in the community and the school in general. But I think a lot of this success that this team has had over the last 20 years didn't directly relate to him. Certainly it didn't start with him. There was a big gap period before they got good.
A big gap. And I think it's interesting to see that because like his name, maybe it's because our generation saw his son go through there and he sat on the sideline or near the court every game. Right.
Yeah.
But his name is iconically connected with this really small school, but that kind of fits his persona. He then went to Salt Lake City and played for Utah for a long time. And he wore the short shorts, the famous, Dream Team clip. He's walking around Barcelona and the woman's like, I love the Dream Team. And he's on her shirt and she still can't recognize him. Right. And John Stockton's an all-time great. If you're looking at the current crop, I don't like that phrase, but the current group of players in the NBA, currently in the NBA, you mentioned Rui, and he may turn out to be that guy one day. The guy right now, though, is Sabonis, right? Sabonis is a two-time All-Star, right? And I would argue last year made the All-Star game probably a little early in a weaker East, right? And then like people talk noise. He heard said noise, and he got a lot better, right? So what have you seen out of Sabonis in the last 18 months? Because he seems like a different player than the 18 before that.
Yeah, it's Sabonis has had a really interesting career. Going back even further, I still am stunned that Billy Donovan and the Thunder drafted him and turned him into just like a stand in the corner 3-point shooter. That's what he was his rookie year, and like he didn't shoot threes at all at Gonzaga because he's if you've seen him play, why he didn't shoot threes in college. He didn't need to. Like, could you imagine
but Andy, he's a tall white guy in the 2020 NBA. That's what he's going to do.
Right. Well, and they had Russell Westbrook, so they just needed people to stand around. And so then then the Thunder obviously made that trade where they sent him and Vic to the Pacers for Paul George, and then you kind of started to see glimpses of Sabonis really blossoming. It didn't happen right away. He still kind of had to figure out how to be a post player again, I think, because he hadn't done it for a whole year. But then once he really kind of blossomed, and I think the ability to play with Miles Turner helped them a little bit. It took them a while to figure that out in Indiana. But once they figured out that he could be like a playmaker, like a guy who gets the ball at the top of the key, I don't want to compare him to Nikola Jokic because he's not as good as Nikola Jokic. Very few players are. Nobody is, maybe. but that's the kind of role that he fills. He gets the ball at the top of the key. He can look to pass. He can look to shoot. He can look to take guys off the dribble. And then he's just a ferocious rebounder. And so when you kind of combine those two things, it's really helped jettison him up to this level where, like you said, he may have made it a tad early, but then this year when he was initially left off, people were mad because his numbers were better and he deserved it.
Right.
Yeah, it was. I'm glad he finally made it.
Well, and it was interesting because when he was initially left off, you're like, how'd you put him on last year and not this year? I guess Julius Randle also got better, but it's weird to see. Yeah. So that's the current guy. And projecting forward, maybe I'm partial to Suggs because, knock on wood, he may be a Rocket. Drew Timme, again, maybe I'm partial to him because I live in Dallas. I coach high school basketball. I'm assistant varsity JV guy, right? And we actually played Timme when he was a junior in high school at Richardson Pierce, and he was really good. I maintain he's gotten so much better. Like he beat us, right? I did not know he was going to be like this. And then Chet, right? So Chet is a much more limited sample size because high school basketball is dramatically different. But what do you see out of those three guys? Do those three guys fit somewhere between Sabonis and Stockton? I mean, do you see how high do you see the potential out of that next wave of Zags?
Yeah, I think for starters, Timme, I would be surprised if he reaches the Sabonis threshold. He's very, very talented, and he's gotten so much better, like you said. But we haven't seen much of an outside shot from him, and I just alluded to the fact that Sabonis didn't shoot a lot of threes in college, so I understand that he could improve there. Rui Hachimura improved. Brandon Clark improved. Almost everybody improves their 3-point shooting when they leave Gonzaga and go to the NBA. At least all the big guys do. And I think it's just because their system doesn't allow a lot of big guys shooting, so they don't need it. Outside of Killian Tilly, who was only a 3-point shooter in college, but he's kind of the exception. But for Timme, I'm worried a little bit about his lateral movement, like defensively. Like obviously in the national championship game, those guards were very, very good, but they worked him. Like they took high ball screens and just went to work on him. And while Davion Mitchell and Jared Butler will be NBA players, they're not going to be the most athletic guards in the NBA. And so he's going to have to work on that a lot. But his offensive game is really strong. Chet, just don't have enough of a sample there really to know, but the potential is through the freaking roof. I mean, he's 7 feet tall. He can shoot threes. He can take guys off the dribble, all of that stuff. But for me, Suggs is the guy. I think Suggs is going to be really, really good. Like, I think he's going to be a really good NBA player.
Well, and so next hot tea, cold brew question. Hot tea, cold brew. Jaylen Suggs should be the number 1 pick, not Cade, not Cade Cunningham, Evan Mobley, or Jalen Green.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel here. I looked at this question for a long time. It obviously it depends on teams, which is, kind of a cop-out answer. I think it's pretty easy to argue for Suggs over Green. Green's a good scorer. He's a great scorer, but I don't know that the rest of his game is there yet. He played less. Obviously, the G League is better competition than Gonzaga faced. There's no doubt about that, but there's less games. We saw him score really well, but I don't know how the rest of his game is going to translate. I think he'll be good. I'm not saying he's bad. I just think that Suggs, you saw more of his all-around game. Mobley is going to be a really good center, but centers are just not as impactful in today's game as they used to be. So that kind of makes me like that's a reason you could argue for Suggs over Mobley. I also think it's totally fine to take Mobley. I think my big board, if I had one, would probably have Suggs 3 behind Cunningham and Mobley. As a diehard Suggs fan, obviously. And Cade is he's just so big and long, and there's not a lot that Suggs definitively does better than Cunningham. I think they're very comparable in a lot of ways, but then that length and size really kind of wins out when everything else is about equal.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, because like if you're going to take Mobley, you're looking at a very different player than the other 3, right? Like Mobley is a big freak athlete, etc. Not these other guys aren't athletic; they're just not 7 feet tall, right?
Right.
Green is different. It depends on what you weigh the Ignite thing like. And so if we stick with Cade and Suggs, I think the interesting thing is it's like, do you take, not that Jaylen Suggs is undersized, but this smaller winner leader type versus the like large freak athlete that like Oklahoma State was good but not great this year, right?
Right.
And I think that's like in the NBA you see that back and forth a lot, and sometimes it works one way. Sometimes you take Marcus Smart and you're really happy with it, and sometimes you take, I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but sometimes it doesn't work out, right? Sometimes you should have taken the bigger guy. Like everyone gave Ben Simmons a hard time for not winning in college. He's been fine, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The Sixers haven't won it all, but he's also 24 or whatever. Like they're fine. And so I don't know what happens. I think it's interesting, like you mentioned the team fit. Like if it really does fall to my Houston Rockets, who are at the bottom of standings right now, I weirdly think I would rather pair Cade, with Kevin Porter Jr., right? Because of that way you're not so little, because Porter is like listed at 6'4". He looks a little small in that. Whereas if you already have more wing talent, right? More of the 6'6s, 6'7s, maybe you think you're okay with Suggs and you don't mind having a 2-3 guy out there.
Yeah.
And because it's not like he's not athletic, he's got bounce. He can really explode both laterally and vertically. It's just, it seems to be a give and take. Talk to me about. So obviously I listen to your podcast, and that's why I want to have you on. The first time I listened to it actually was my other show, Up in Sports. Shock and I were talking. The thesis for that week was the tournament is Gonzaga's to lose. And if I'm being honest, I listened to your podcast in prep for it because I was like, I know one podcast that is dedicated to the Zags.
Exactly.
And first thing is crammed on. Is that a Pacific Northwest thing? Like I had never, I knew exactly what you meant when you said it, but you're like, and Suggs just crammed it on someone the first possession or first whatever of the year.
Yeah.
Like, I know exactly what you meant. Is that a Northwest thing?
It's an Andy thing. I'm not sure. I heard it somewhere. So if I heard it somewhere, I heard it in the Pacific Northwest. So we can go with that.
Every region's got their things. I just never heard that. I was like, I was like, oh, that's a really good, that's exactly what's happening.
That's how it felt.
I don't mean to like toot my own horn. As a Texan, I was like, but man, Baylor's really good. And so Baylor's got several pros on the team. Honestly, we'll get to a different question on them in a second, but Do you think that's going to hurt Suggs realistically in this like carousel of top 4 or 5 picks? Or is it kind of like, listen, those were two or three pro guards?
Yeah, I mean, I think I haven't rewatched the game for emotional reasons, but
you got to take care of yourself, man.
Yeah, exactly. I will eventually, and that's kind of one of the main things I'm going to be looking for, because I remember even watching it live, like Joel Ayayi, who is declared for the NBA draft and will be an NBA player. He did struggle against NBA caliber guards in that game. He struggled to get shots up because the closing speed was fast enough and he was just not quick enough to get his shots up. And defensively, he didn't look great. And I remember that in the moment being like, oh, this is not great for his pro, like what he's trying to do. And with Jaylen, I don't remember it being an immediate issue, but I'd have to look back a little bit more. I do think, I'm sure I can tell you right now, scouts are going to watch the hell out of that game, because that's what they're going to be looking for is how does he do against a Davion Mitchell and a Jared Butler and Maceo Teague. I think a lot of that game, and I know we'll talk about it in a little bit, was fatigue from the UCLA game too, and particularly with Jaylen and how hard he had to work for that team to win that game. And he was just gassed. I really think he was just gassed.
Well, and jumping on the table like that'll do it to you, I guess, right?
Yeah, exactly, right.
Forget 45 minutes before that. It was the jumping on the table. That kind of leads me to my next question, and I think this is a really common Gonzaga critique. If I'm being honest, I think I know your take based on listening to your podcast some, but I got to hear you say it on the show, and I want to talk about it a little bit. Hot tea, cold brew. Playing in the WCC helps the Zags more than it hurts. Which way do you fall on that one?
I mean, it kind of goes a little bit both ways. Obviously, Gonzaga playing inferior opponents to teams that, Big 10 opponents and Big 12 and who they have to play night in and night out in January, February. Certainly it helps Gonzaga in the sense that they are probably a little bit fresher. Mark Fewwick weirdly doesn't like going to his bench, even in like obvious blowouts, until the last few minutes. So if you were to look at the box score, you'd see like Corey Kispert played 34 minutes a game against Portland. I'm like, why? Take him out. I don't
as a Mike D'Antoni guy for the last how many years, I get it. I 100% get it.
Exactly. But at the same time, like, I don't think that it dramatically hurts them when it comes to the NCAA tournament. And I think that people who look very surface level at the stats will see like, oh, they lose to a lot of 1 seeds, which a lot of the time that they've lost to 1 seeds was when they were a 9 seed or a 12 seed or things like that. And it's like, well, yeah, people lose to 1 seeds. I saw somebody who said that Gonzaga, like he was trying to prove that Gonzaga always loses when they lost to Duke 5 years ago. And it was like, they lost by 9 to Duke, when Gonzaga was a 2 seed and Duke was a 1 seed, like that's kind of the expected outcome.
And like, was that the Winslow, Okafor? Was that the team with 3 pros? Like that was 3 first round picks.
Right. Yeah. Gonzaga's best player was Kyle Wiltshire. Like he played, and
one-time Rocket.
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I think Gonzaga's certainly early in their time in this, run, they were just happy to make the tournament, a lot of 11 seeds, and we're losing to better teams because that's what happens. But now it's like they're rarely losing to seeds worse than them. It really doesn't happen all that often. The 2013 team, the Kelly Olynyk team, obviously they lost to 9-seeded Wichita State, which has hurt their reputation still. But also that Wichita State team went to the Final Four, so. Like I think they were a better team than people thought.
And that team had a kid named Fred VanVleet on it, right? Like they were pretty good.
Yeah, they had 3 league guys. Fred VanVleet, Cleanthony Early, and Ron Baker. They were all league guys. So it's like they were a good team. And they lost to Florida State a few years ago when they were a 4 seed and Florida State was a 9 seed. But Killian Tilly, their best player on that team, got hurt like 40 minutes before the game. I'm like, well, like you kind of want to throw that out a little bit. So I don't think that it hurts them too dramatically. I really don't. But I will say that I really wish that Baylor game had not got canceled earlier in the year, because this was the first time they really saw, like, they demolished USC because they have the ability to handle really good big men, but USC's guards were not very good. Creighton, they had their one guard who went off, and then they just beat the rest of the team. It was fine. UCLA, which has good guards, took them to overtime, like nearly took them down. So I think Gonzaga could have benefited from playing better guards throughout the season. Like I don't think that's a hot take at all. Obviously, if they had played better guards, they would have been, or if they'd played Baylor in December like they were supposed to, they probably would have been more prepared for Baylor in March. They would have been more ready for that.
Jaylen certainly would have. The truth is that Baylor game, as a Big 12 fan, but not a particularly big Baylor fan, right? It felt like it was 2 years coming, right? Like a year ago's tournament, I think, unless they were on the same side of the bracket, you would not have been crazy to have Gonzaga and Baylor in the 2020 national championship game on your bracket either, right? And so like then it doesn't happen in the spring of 2020, and then it doesn't happen in December. It's like, when is this game gonna happen? And then it finally does. You're like, oh, why did that game happen? But anyway, there's like this idea that it helps them because it's an easy conference to win, and winning gets you automatically in. It adds up to a bunch of wins. Like, they obviously made the tournament 20 whatever years in a row, right? There's also this idea that, like, yeah, sure, it's easier to get in, but you have to win the conference tournament to get in, right? You can't slip up in a one and done scenario there. And like you're saying, Davion Mitchell had to guard Cade Cunningham throughout the year, right? They had to play twice, right? And like that helped prepare him to then guard Suggs or whoever, right? Like Suggs doesn't get that same back and forth. It's a double-edged sword, and it's always interesting to hear someone that sees it night in, night out talk through it, because I don't know that I have a real hard take either way on it, right?
Well, I think a lot of Gonzaga fans do feel really strongly one way or the other, and I think that those fans, they're just a little too, like, it's a bit of both. Like, if you cannot admit that in ways playing a poor conference schedule doesn't disadvantage them, you're out of your mind. And if you can't admit that it doesn't advantage them a little bit too, like it does. I think what people really get upset about, Gonzaga fans in particular, is the notion that they would automatically be like a 5-loss team in some of these conferences. Like, in some years, sure, obviously they would be worse, but like people are like, well, they'd lose 3 games in the Pac-12, and I'm like, this year, no, I don't think that they would have. Like, UCLA was the best team in the Pac-12. Like, first of all, see what they did to USC. They dismantled them.
Right.
UCLA was at playing the best that any team in the Pac-12 played all year. They were at their absolute peak. And yeah, it took a 37-footer, but Gonzaga still won. Like, they still beat them.
And I think that people look at that UCLA game and see like the 11 seed next to their name. And if you didn't watch West Coast basketball all year because it's late at night or whatever, right? Like, UCLA had COVID stuff come up mid-season, had injury. Like, if they'd played the whole season healthy, full roster, regular, everything, they probably aren't an 11 seed, and that's why they went on the run they did, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Anyway, so this next question is something I'm intrigued by, because I think this Ignite thing is fascinating, and I don't think Gonzaga fans are too high on it in the last 10 days or whatever it is. Hot tea or cold brew, having the G League Ignite taking players like Van Bojang, who was a Gonzaga commit before, hurts the Gonzagas of the world more than the traditional Blue Bloods?
Yeah, I didn't know how to answer this. It took me a while, because I think I can see the point. I can see why that would be a strong argument, but I think that this particular instance with Zhang was more to do with Tommy Lloyd, the Gonzaga's longtime associate head coach. He'd been there for 20 years. He was their primary international recruiter. He's the reason they had Rony Turioff and Domantas Sabonis and Kelly Olynyk and all of the guys who were not domestic recruits. And he left. He took the head coaching job at Arizona, which who can blame him? That's even though they're going under with some penalty issues,
it's a head gig in a Power 5 conference.
Exactly.
Right?
And a program that's been really nationally recognized until very recently. So I think that probably had a bit of an impact on Zhang's specific decision. But I do think that the G League is it's certainly going to impact Gonzaga in a lot of ways. I guess for me, the hard part about this is I think that Gonzaga versus like the Dukes and the Kentuckys and the North Carolinas and stuff, they're recruiting a lot of the same players. So players
now
who
they
go...
Are, yeah.
Now they are, yes, as of like 2 years, really, because Gonzaga's been focused so much on the international recruits. So if we see more of a rash of international recruits coming to America to play in the G League and then hopefully jump to the NBA, then that's going to impact Gonzaga. But I think Gonzaga's international pipelines already took a hit with the Tommy Lloyd moving over. Right. So I think they're going to really, really stick with, continuing to do what they did this year, which is get the best recruit in the country. Like, if you can keep doing that, you're going to be fine.
Well, and I told you pre-pod, little behind the scenes action. I thought that Chet might do the G League thing. 500 Gs. He's clearly a pro basketball player. He wouldn't go to college in a pre-2006 world, right? And a post whatever year they get rid of it world, right? My thing on this question is really, if you're Kentucky, they get 7 McDonald's All-Americans a year or whatever.
Right.
Not 7, but like Kentucky, Duke, Carolina, they get a lot. So losing 1 or 2, I don't see it hurting them as much. Like, if Chet had not declared Gonzaga, if he'd end up pulling the shirt off and it was a StockX, G League, Ignite, whatever all the different ads are, like, I think that hurts them way, way more because they're in the same pool, but they're only getting like they got Suggs, right? And then I guess Nimbar was a highly touted recruit too, right? But like Suggs is a difference maker. If Suggs had done this instead, like they don't hit the shot against UCLA, right? Like something different happens. And they don't seem to they're working their way there, but they don't strike me as having as much wiggle room.
No, you're right. I think this past class that they just got, Hunter Salas is 6th in the class. He committed. Obviously, Chet's number 1. And then Ben Gregg, he I guess reclassified because he graduated from high school early and then just showed up on the Gonzaga roster halfway through the season. But he was like 30th in the class. And then their next one was Caden Perry, who was like 75th. So you're right. If you lose one of those guys, your class is still good. It's not bad at all, but it's not the level that a lot of those programs are getting pretty much year in and year out. So I in that regard, yes, I think you're right. Like Zhang in particular, as an example, like we also didn't know whether he was going to be 2021 or 2022. Like it was never very clear. So he would have helped this class a lot, but it's not as significant of a loss. But there are definitely years where like if they lose one big guy, it's going to hurt a lot more than it would hurt a North Carolina or a Duke. So yeah, I'll buy into that. Well,
and knock on wood that it happens to the Carolinas and Dukes, the world that can afford it, and not y'all anyway, right? Like y'all don't want that to happen anyway. All right. This is my favorite what if question because I both love and hate March Madness for any number of reasons. And part of that's probably because I'm a Texas guy. I took 2 summer school classes there, but my parents went there. I tell people all the time, if it didn't exist, I wouldn't exist. So I have to root for Texas. It's not just because I like pain. Hot tea, cold brew. Even though the game was a blowout, Gonzaga could have forced a game 7 if they had an NCAA title game decided in a 7-game series type scenario.
Yeah, I 100%. I'm on board with this. I don't really see any situation where it doesn't go 7. Like I don't think Baylor wins in 4, 5, 6. I don't think Gonzaga. I'm not going to go that far the other direction and say, Gonzaga should have blown them out in 4. Obviously, they didn't. That clearly didn't happen. But these two teams were such titans. I mean, that's what's hard for people who didn't watch a lot of college basketball this year, who maybe just saw the NCAA tournament. Like, yes, Gonzaga got a lot of attention, and I think that maybe Baylor didn't get as much attention as they deserve. I know Baylor didn't get as much attention as they deserved because I think this Gonzaga team was one of the best college basketball teams of the last 10 years. I'm not going to go as far as to say the best because some people have said that, but I'm like, I don't know, this Villanova team was really good. And but this Baylor team is like, should be a part of that conversation. Like they're realistically were that good. And so, to get the doors blown off was certainly not something I expected to happen. And it was, crushing for me personally, obviously. But I think if they got a chance to play them again, they come back and win. And I think it would just kind of balance it out. I think the two teams were really, really evenly matched,
Yeah. And I think that's where, not to go back to the West Coast Conference thing, the speed clearly played a factor early.
Yeah.
Right. Baylor just was ready to go and super fast. And they got 3 pro defensive minded guards, right?
Yeah.
Like that's just the game. They had like a bunch of bigs, one of which should probably go to the NFL. Looks like big looking dudes.
Yeah.
And I think people don't like, I asked that question. The reason I hate March Madness is it doesn't give us often the best team, right? It's just like the year Kentucky was also undefeated and lost in the Elite 8. You're not going to convince me they weren't the best team in the country that year, because they lost a close game in Wisconsin, right? It's 1-game samples. Weird things happen. The kids are all between 18 and 22. Like just weird stuff happens. And when I watch NBA games, right, like the famous Rocket series, and I always take it back to Rockets and people in the cup. But if we go back to the Rocket series and they played the Warriors and the Chris Paul went down thing, right? Like the only close games in that series are games 5 and 7. The one Paul goes down, and then 7 is the one where they miss 27 straight threes and lose by 9. But like games 1, 2, 3, and 4 were like 20-point Warriors win, 20-point Rockets win, 20-point Rockets win, 20-point Warriors win, like boom, boom, boom. Right. And then game 6 back in Oracle was a 20-point Warriors win as well. Like the game, it was this pendulum back and forth, and it was like between games, folks are game planning. Okay, here's what they did. Here's our chess move. Da da da. And I think few could have done that, right? Like I think few has been around the block enough that if he could have that UCLA Adam Morrison game, if he could take that to a 3-game series, right? He could make counter punches in between games there. I think that I don't think it's crazy to think that Gonzaga forces 7. Maybe it goes 6 or something, right? But be honest, would you rather lose in that manner where it's like never a doubt this is not going to go our way, or would you rather lose like UCLA lost the game before?
Well, Gonzaga's other national championship appearance wasn't quite as heartbreaking as the UCLA game, but when they played North Carolina in 2017, Gonzaga was winning with like 6 minutes to go in that game and ended up losing. That was pretty crushing. I think if everything else was even, that game probably would have hurt more, the close game. The reason that it didn't is because I think we were just so happy to have actually made it to a national championship game.
First time.
So it was the first time in the national championship game. It was the first time in the Final Four. And so it was kind of like, it sucked that we lost, and there was some officiating questions that a lot of people had in that game. It was tough, but I think, this Baylor game hurt so bad because it was like 11-1, and it was like you still felt like they could come back, but it was so fast that that feeling just disappeared. Like at halftime, it was a 10-point game. And it was like, okay, like if they come out strong in the second half, and then the first possession was a turnover, and I think Davion Mitchell scored, and it was like, this is it. Like it's 1956 in this game, and it's like I never felt like they were going to win, and it was, I think I would take a closer game. Like if Gonzaga had lost that UCLA game, that would have been terrible, certainly. And for UCLA fans, I'm sure that it was horrible. And having to see the replay all the time, like you're going to see a lot more replays of Jaylen Suggs shot than you're going to see replays of with Davion Mitchell hitting a 3. Like there's not a lot of replays from the championship game, so you got to live with seeing Suggs jump on the table for the rest of your life. But then again, Gonzaga fans lived with Adam Morrison crying for 17 years, so it's it evens out. And
I had to ask you before you sent for promos for tonight, because I was like, I don't know if this is really cool yet. Like it's been a long time.
Yeah. So some people still get mad about it, but I mean, opposing fans bring like posters of Adam Morrison crying to literally every game. So it's just a part of it now. I don't know. You probably heard this, but Adam Morrison is a play-by-play radio guy for Gonzaga right now. And so he got to call the Jaylen Suggs 3 that
you talked about on your show.
Which is the coolest thing, and I have a feeling a lot of people are like, this was probably so cathartic for him. And like maybe in some level, I don't think he was thinking about it. He was like, oh, remember when I cried 15 years ago? Like, I don't think that was in his brain at that moment, but like, it is still kind of cool that he was involved in like a really epic moment to beat UCLA in a similar fashion. It's kind of fun full circle.
He was involved. His voice will be over it, right? However,
yes, exactly. Exactly.
Speaking of important players, we're going to jump to our open container question. Once you're about to top off of your Yeti, anything can get in or out. Hot, cold, liquid, ice, anything. And our open container question is just kind of this long form. Not that we've been concise, but is Jaylen Suggs the most important player in Gonzaga history? And then in turn, does that mean that UCLA shot is the most important shot in UCLA history? Or is there someone else that me as an outsider is missing? or talk us through that, because if so, like that makes the last 6 months really, really important, right?
Yes. It's a tough question to answer yet. Obviously, we'll know more as time goes on, but I'm kind of inclined to say yes on both accounts. I'll get to the shot in a second. But with the player, like the fact that Chet Holmgren committed to Gonzaga already pushes Jaylen really, really high on that list, because not only were they teammates in high school, but, Chet got to see a player come to Gonzaga who was a top-rated recruit, highest recruit in school history, and it didn't, playing in the WCC didn't hurt his draft stock. He was still on national TV all of the time. He got this really iconic moment. He got more press than the G League guys. He got more attention than Green and Kuminga did. He got equal press to Cade Cunningham. I think it seemed pretty equal, at least out on the West Coast. So, for any, but not just Chet, but any other high-ranking recruits, Hunter Salas, who committed to Gonzaga, same rating as Jaylen Suggs when Suggs was here. Like, when you see this guy and you're like, okay, he's immediately had success. He seemed to have a blast. And he didn't hurt his draft stock at all. That's going to encourage more of these guys to come, which we've already seen with Chet. And if that continues to happen where their domestic recruiting is just top notch constantly, then it's really hard to not argue that Suggs, just from that perspective, is the most important player in school history. Adam Morrison didn't bring in top 10 recruits. He didn't do that. And he was a local Spokane kid, which, is part of the reason that didn't happen. Sure, they've had some international players that have helped with the international recruiting, but nobody specific in my mind. I actually think Kelly Olynyk is one of the 5 most important players in Gonzaga history because he did the sit out thing where he got a lot bigger and stronger and better. And then that helped spurn a lot of the transfers. Obviously, Kelly was not a transfer, but without Kelly Olynyk having the year that he did, I don't think you see Kyle Wiltshire. I don't think you see Jonathan Williams. I don't think you see Brandon Clark. Maybe not Nigel Williams-Goss. Like all of those guys wanted to come to Gonzaga, sit out a year, and then really understand the system, get physically stronger, and then just cook in their first year of eligibility. Right. I think Kelly had a lot to do with that. But Jaylen, it's really hard not to pick him for most important player.
And so does that shot then become, because it's the most important player, it's a Final Four game, it's like that's the most important shot in school history?
The only reason I'm hesitant is because of the 1999 NCAA tournament. The slipper still fits, the iconic phrase. The shot was a tip from Casey Calvary. It was a missed shot by Quentin Hall. These names won't mean anything to anybody because they're not NBA guys. But and Calvary, guys. Yeah, exactly. Calvary tipped it in with 2 seconds left to get the lead against Florida. It sent them to the Elite Eight. They were this little known 11 seed in the Elite Eight. Gus Johnson screams, "The slipper still fits," and that cemented them. They weren't just a plucky 11 seed going to the Sweet 16 kind of happens every year. They went to the Elite Eight, they almost won. They almost went to the Final Four. Right. And so that, how much of that immediately, was that the reason Dan Dickau transferred because he was a starting point guard the next year and they went to the tournament? Was that the reason that Blake Stepp came to campus and all these guys who were really good for this team in the early 2000s? Adam Morrison probably would have come anyways because he lived in Spokane. Who knows? But that shot, if that shot doesn't go down, you can reasonably think that maybe this program doesn't become what it is. And so it's hard to not call that the most important shot using that term, but greatest shot. Yes. Suggs for sure. Casey Calvary just slapped the ball 8 feet away from the hoop and it went in. It was a nice shot. I'm glad he made it, but Jaylen Suggs' shot was extraordinarily impressive. It was hyper clutch. It sent the team to a national championship when they desperately needed to go to a national championship game
to validate everything, frankly, right?
Yes, absolutely. So it's tough to compare the two because they're so different and the programs are in completely different places, but both of them have an incredible amount of importance for this team.
So talk to me then, because again, I said earlier, I'm a Texas guy. My first good tournament experience would have been TJ Ford in the Final Four run his sophomore year. TJ Ford's a ton of fun. A couple years later, a kid named Kevin Durant comes through, right? Durant does not actually have tournament success, but was definitely the best player. I don't know if he's the most important yet, but the best player to have ever come through Texas, right? He comes and he brings in a couple of recruits with him, like DJ Augustine, Damian James is a guy who's in the NBA for a little while. They come in, and actually the next year's team is better because Durant goes one and done. The rest of the guys stay. They get to the Elite Eight and lose to a kid named Derrick Rose. Tough shot, tough break.
Yep.
So that team's actually better. And then I maintain there was this window after that then you had PJ Tucker and LaMarcus Aldridge come through. And then you had guys, Avery Bradley came through. Guys came through Texas after that were better than they were coming before, really even TJ, right? Before Durant. And then we've had this window the last few years where we've had pros. We had Jared Allen. We've had Jackson Hayes. We've had Mo Bamba, who might have had a better song than pro career about him, right? But I think that the issue becomes you get this big name, so you get one or two guys. How do you turn that into getting a program going with a few guys? Do you see that so now you've got Chet, right? And Chet is probably a one-and-done guy too. And in the world of one-and-dones, how do you make sure 3 or 4 years from now that you're actually building on this? Because Minnehaha can't produce all of them.
Yes, yeah, no, it's a really interesting question that a lot of fans are kind of anxious about because Gonzaga had all of their success up to really, I mean, technically Zach Collins was a one and done, but it was like he didn't come to campus as a one and done. That wasn't the expectation.
Right.
He didn't start a single game in his college career because he was behind Shemek Karnowski, and he had a really really good NCAA tournament and got a lot of attention and decided to leave, but. Suggs is the first, like, this dude came to campus to play for 1 year. Chet's number 2. Salas might be number 3. It's not as clear, but there's going to be more. This is going to continue to happen. And a lot of fans are worried that it kind of, it reshapes the integrity of the program a little bit in a way of like they've built themselves on being this like guys come here for 3 or 4 years, they develop under a system like, and that's where they've had so much success. You look at a Joel Ayayi who was a redshirt who didn't play. You look at a Corey Kispert who looked to go to the NBA draft after his junior year and was told, and now he's, was talked about as a lottery pick for large chunks of this year and will at least be a first rounder. And that's where Gonzaga's had a lot of success. And of course, internationally, almost all of their international players take 2 to 3 years. Rui Hachimura looked like a complete mess his freshman year. He was a nightmare. He didn't know the plays. Like, he didn't know English very well, to be frank. Like, he was really struggling. And so that's how Gonzaga's built so much of their success is developing guys over time. And you don't get to do that with freshmen. You certainly develop them over the course of the year. Jaylen Suggs got better. Chet Holmgren will get better, but there's something that I think gets a little bit lost. And so Gonzaga will need to focus on not going the route of Kentucky and other programs where they get 5 or 6 one and dones in a year, because if you miss on a few, or if they just, even if you don't miss, they're all good, they just don't gel, you're going to see a lot more players transfer or leave early. It just gets really messy. And so I think Gonzaga will probably, they're very intentional about the kind of player that they want. And Jaylen was a guy who they knew he was going to be one and done, but they felt really confident that he would fit for the year that he was here. And they hit right. Mm-hmm. They got it right. Yeah. They're gonna eventually get one wrong. It's probably gonna happen. And so when that happens, then it's kind of, how do they respond to that? Is Mark Few willing to bench a guy who's a one and done player because he's not fitting the system well? Those kinds of things. And we don't know the answers to that yet, but so far so good, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting to think about the building a program of one and dones. You really do have to have the right one and dones, because it's not that Texas didn't have them, or the Kentucky and Duke's of the world. They did the one and done game. Duke's been the one and done game since that game we're talking about. It was 2015, was it, where they had Winslow and those guys, and they've been in that game since. And they both missed the tournament this year, right? That's part of the rolling the dice on new kids every year. Is you don't build it quite the same way. It helps to get in those top 10 recruits. It helps to get a 7-footer that can do everything like Chet Holmgren looks like.
Right. Yeah.
Can you imagine can you imagine finishing Algebra 2 at the end of the day and having to go cover that guy in high school? Like, oh my God.
For real. Seriously. Yeah.
Anyway, just tremendous and good on you for getting him. We're going to move on to our second last segment, I guess. The second last segment is called the Long Two. This is new a couple weeks ago. But it's a long two is, a mid-range jump shot. It's a long 2-pointer. It's hated by some analytics nerds like my old guy, Darren Mooring. And a long 2-pointer seems silly because it's just as low percentage as a 3-pointer, but it's worth just 2/3 the points, right? It's our shot, and it's what we do here in the mid-range. So these are a little bit sillier or outside the box, not as serious things. My question to you, my long 2 question is, you followed the Zags for a long time, multiple times a week. It's going on the podcast. It's been like 18 months at this point, right? 150 plus episodes. Again, it's a guy doing research on the Zags. Myself, it was a great listen. You do mailbag questions, so there is some back and forth, but you know your stuff. You're on it. My question is that you do a great. My question is not this, but you do a great job of keeping the show going through lulls of Gonzaga news, right? Because it's just not a 24/7, 365 news cycle. Right. What other kinds of basketball teams, college, pro, whatever, could you see someone doing that with, right? Like, who else could you see being as intriguing as a year-round, multiple times a week discussion? Because even pro teams take time off in the summer. And if you want to get too attached to a pro, we've seen those guys bounce real quickly. They seem to, new teams every year, right? who else do you know of anyone? Can you see anyone that would be as interesting to follow?
Yeah, it's tough because I think pro teams, certainly, obviously, pro teams have huge swaths of really dedicated fans who will consume every off-season content. I myself, I almost love off-season content more than in-season content sometimes. Like I mentioned, I follow the Blazers before we started, and their recent in-season content has not been particularly fun because they've just been losing a lot of close games. But I love, who are they going to draft? Or in this case, who are they going to, since they gave you the draft picks in the Rocco trade, who are they going to you pick in the second round, or who are they going to sign? And so I think a lot of pro teams have that organically with their really passionate fan base, but obviously more casual fans will tune in on opening day and tune out whenever they get bounced. And so keeping it fresh is a little bit harder. With college teams, I think you really need a team that is, people are just really ingrained in the program. And Gonzaga fans are so passionate about the program and so just willing to consume so much content. I think for me, I was the second Gonzaga podcast that really existed. There was one, the Old Heads. They've been around for a long time. Free Ira Brown is the name of the show. They're fantastic. And then I came in. And then since then, there's been a big growth of other pods, and that's great. It's great because yes, we're competing in a sense, but also fans are listening to all of them. Right. They consume everything that they can, and they're so dedicated to focusing on guys in the pros. I retweeted something that you posted of a highlight of Kelly Olynyk cramming it on somebody, and a ton of Gonzaga fans were all into that because they love seeing him have success. He was there 7 years ago, and I think there's a lot of other colleges where you are aware of those guys certainly, and that they're playing professionally, but it's not as a part of who you are, is still continuing to root for Kelly Olynyk this many years later, or still people are still mad that Kevin Pangos isn't in the NBA. Kevin Pangos, he went to Europe 6 years ago. He's been in Europe for 6 years. He's got a wife, he's got a kid, he's got a whole family and a life over there, and we're still he should be in the NBA. And
PJ Tucker came back. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. It can happen. I still thought Kyle Witzer deserved more of a shot, but he's just too slow. But yeah, I think you need a college team where the fan base is so passionate about the athletics. And obviously football helps because it's just another season where you have more content. So schools that have football have more of an advantage than I have, because I don't have football to talk about. Gonzaga's baseball team is good, so I can talk about that a little bit. They just got ranked for the first time, which is kind of fun. But for the most part, I focus a lot on the NBA guys. I focus a lot on the European guys, which is people are really interested in that, of how is Kevin doing? How is Kyle Witzer doing? And some of the lesser guys. But I think the biggest thing to keep things fresh and interesting is, for me, from a podcast perspective, is to obviously have mailbag segments, give fans a chance to actually tell me what they want and ask what they want and talk about it that way. But Gonzaga is such a unique fan base that it really helps make it so that I can continue to do podcasts in May, June, July, August, when there's really not a lot of news. And yeah, we focus on the NBA draft, but after that, it's there's not a lot to talk about. So
what I'm hearing is big time college program that wins a lot of games and has no football team. I only know one of those.
yeah, exactly. I was trying to think the whole time.
Yeah. I guess you did say if you wanted to talk football, you could talk that in the fall. If you want to talk baseball, you could in the spring, right? But
I was gonna say Butler used to be that for a while.
Yeah.
When they were really good, but they've kind of fallen off. There's some Big East schools that kind of fit that bill, but nobody who's quite as consistent as Gonzaga, obviously.
Well, because Georgetown is certainly, because they're FCS in football. It's a much smaller school outside of the basketball program. I wonder if that's the move. I don't know. And it's not because I want to start one. I'm just intrigued because I knew as soon as I was I needed some research in the Zags, I knew where to go, right? I knew exactly where to go look.
Yeah.
And if Georgetown were to make some big run next year and I need to do some research on the Hoyas to figure out what's going on, is that out there? Right? I don't. And it's interesting because I know if Kentucky does, there's 1,000 things on Kentucky, right? If Duke does, there's 1,000 things on Duke, because those are giant national fan bases. Like you said earlier, there are fans that they call them T-shirt Texas fans here in Texas, where you have no connection besides the T-shirt you buy to these schools, right? And when it happens at a school like Gonzaga, even as progressive as it's been, right? We talk about the build up for a while now. It's not prevalent. I guess you said though you feel like Gonzaga podcasts have popped up in the last 18 months.
Yeah, but very recently. They weren't around much until, those last 2 years, and Gonzaga's been in the tournament. So for 18 years, Gonzaga made the tournament and there was one podcast. And now there's, 7 or 8 or so. And a couple of them are former players too. So I don't know how much that counts, but yeah, it takes a while. I found a Creighton one when I brought a guest onto my show. I did find somebody who talks about Creighton. So they exist for some of those schools, but it was the only one I found. So.
Well, I'd ask. There's probably some questions asked about McDermott there, but I'm not going to get into that.
Yeah, I ignored that.
Interesting, because I just think it's an interesting passion. Because so I go back to that TJ Ford Texas team. My introduction to Gonzaga was I was filling out a bracket. The first time I ever put money on a bracket, I was like 12 years old. Which means I probably should not have had money on a bracket, but I was filling it out. I was putting in my dad's firm for their pool, and we each put like $5 in, put whatever. And I was like, Dad, I can't even pronounce this school. Who is it? Like I'm a kid in Austin, right? And he goes, "Oh, they're good. Trust me." And I was like, "Oh, okay. Like, yeah, sure. Like,
that sounds good to me."
That was my introduction. Was like, they're good. Trust me. You're not going to watch them. You'll see them. Like that's your whole experience is just like they're kind of good, and you're going to roll with it. And frankly, in more years than not, like you can put them on the second line. Like they're going to win a game, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I wonder if that's going to be so with smaller outlets getting out podcast. We're sitting here with Belly Up Podcast with all these different smaller outlets pushing fan based content. Are you going to is that the next wave of things? We had like this blow up from local newspapers to like ESPN and frankly, ESPN wants to hire us. Andy and I are great guys.
We'll take it.
ESPN. And then now you're seeing it trickle back down to like Score Zags Score. People dive into Kentucky content. People dive into Texas, Orange Bloods, right? Those kind of things. I don't know. I just wonder if that's the next wave. And I'm not a surfer, so I guess I won't jump on. But
it seems like it. I said I wrote at USA Today. They were doing team-specific sites. Seahawks Wire, Trojans Wire. Those are the places that I wrote. Sports Illustrated is trying to do that. They haven't gotten all the way there, but that's kind of something that I talked to them about potentially doing a Mariners site for a while. And then Locked On is a huge podcast network, and they do that, and they've been really successful at doing that. And I reached out to them to do a Locked On Zags podcast a while before I started this podcast, and they said no because they don't have college football. And guess what just cropped up 2 months ago? Locked On Zags. It exists now, and I know the guy who hosts it, and he reached out to me ahead of time because my pod is like modeled after that format. Is kind of where I got a lot of my things. So he was like, "Hey, I'm just letting you know that I'm going to start this," and I was like, "I proved that this works, like that you can do this." I'm not trying to toot my own horn or anything, but like that was like people will consume content about specific teams, and they'll consume it from people who are like really invested in the program. And that's kind of what we've seen a lot of these organizations start to push towards doing that. And I think it's good for the fans. I think they get a closer relationship when they have somebody who they know is kind of on the ground with them talking about the teams.
Yeah, the fans, and then like I said, like fans and people looking to I need to learn more of the same thing, right? To have like it's not just what ESPN has because they have like a person. They have one guy cover the Spurs, Rockets, and Mavs. It's like those are 4 hours apart from one another. Anyway, our last long segment is Wednesday Night Writes. This is a thing I like to do, talk about things that we may have written or read about in basketball in the last week. I know you've got some stuff on rapid fire mine. Always read Nikias. Nikias is a big Twitter personality in the NBA world, but roaming the baseline, where he just basically lays out like what he's noticing in the last week. Fun article I read this week by Mike. I'm going to butcher his last name. Vorkunov. I've never read anything by him before, but the title got me. A search for the lost Soprano scene. How Tony Soprano tried to get LeBron to New York, and it was this entire deep dive into like back when LeBron was getting recruited by the Knicks, and they were asking some of the celebrity fans in the front row. They actually talked to Gandolfini and Falco and like did this whole scene amongst their other celebrity fans to like recruit LeBron to come back to the Knicks. And like the tape is lost because I guess like some Sopranos people don't want to confirm if Tony Soprano is alive or dead after the way the show ended, right? Like there's a whole lot of stuff there.
Funny.
Fascinating deep dive by Mike Vorkunov there. So fun read on The Athletic. On bellyupsports.com, Russell Westbrook is tired of your disrespect. Shout out to Kyle for that one. And Damian Lillard is the only untouchable in Portland, which is an interesting take. I'm really partial to CJ McCollum, so that's interesting, by Jordan Kirsch. Fun stuff. I had a little bit myself. You can check out at Painsworth512 stuff I put out this week. What have you been reading or writing, Andy?
Yeah, most of my writing has been about baseball lately. I haven't gotten to write about basketball in a while. I'd like to start doing that a little bit more, so I will hopefully do some of that soon. An article I read earlier today that I absolutely loved was by Eric Woodyard at ESPN. It's called The Jaylen Generation, How Jaylen Rose's Name... It's how Jaylen Rose's name has spread throughout the world of sports. And it's, obviously I read it because of Jalen Suggs in part, but it's literally an article about how like the Fab Five and how popular they were spurned a bunch of people named Jaylen. And Jaylen Rose's mom like literally followed all professional athletes named Jaylen because she felt like it had like she had a role in it. And like Jaylen Rose his mom recently passed, and he was going through her stuff and found like a list of like everybody named Jaylen, and she was like literally tracking how they were doing. And it's just this really fascinating article about the name Jaylen, literally, and Jaylen Rose, who was obviously a great college basketball player and a very good NBA player, but not so generationally talented that you'd expect like a whole group of kids. I mean, there's like 3 people in the top 10 of the NBA draft named Jaylen, like Jalen Suggs, Jalen Green, and the Duke kid. I can't remember his last name actually. Right.
But
like, there's going to be a ton of, and because Jalen's in the NFL draft this year, like it's a very fascinating article about literally just the name Jaylen, but I liked it.
Well, it's interesting too, because you'd anticipate like everyone's named Jordan now. Like I just said, an article by a guy named Jordan, right? Because he is as generationally talented as he was. You said Jaylen Rose was good, but like, was it that good?
Right. Yeah. Well, the start of the article kind of talks about how they wanted to name their kid after the Fab Five, and like just none of the other names were good enough. Like Chris is boring, and Ray is. They said Ray was an old man name. I think they didn't want to go with Jimmy, so it pretty much was just. Well, we're going or Jawan, and Jawan's kind of unique, so you see more of those, I think, crop up. But yeah, Jaylen was just the one that people settled on, apparently.
Right, Jalen's like not as unique as Jawan, right? And maybe that's the millennial in me, but like I don't know. I know some Juans. I don't know many Jawans.
Right, it's pretty unique.
And then, but I do feel like I know some Jalen's. Like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I've certainly coached a couple. I've taught.
You're right.
When they're younger, so maybe it's taken off, right? All right, and then our last thing before we let you out of here is a buzzer beater. 24 seconds to get off a take, thought, or some sort of something you got to get off in 24 seconds at the end of the buzzer. I know you're a college guy. Do you need 30 seconds or 24? Okay.
I think I can do 24. We'll see.
All right. Do you want to go first or second? Do you want to wrap up the end, or you want to go first?
I'll let you go first so I can time in my head how long 24 seconds is.
All right. I'm going to hold the timer where I can see it, and then I'll put it up to the screen when it's your turn to go, I promise. All right.
All right.
All right. 3, 2, 1. There's been a lot of talk because a certain three-point shooter in the Bay Area has been putting up crazy stats that you don't need to include wins in the MVP conversation, but you absolutely need to include wins in the MVP conversation. If you don't include wins in the MVP conversation, what are you so valuable at? Like, what are you valuable at doing, right? It's got to be Joker this year. It's got to be someone that puts their team in a position to win night in, night out, and then does it. Not just does it early, but does it often. And that's my 24 seconds. Okay, I usually get cut off, so there's no harm in saying if you get cut off, Andy. All right. Are you ready to roll, sir?
Yes, I'm going to tell you right now that part of what I was going to say, I pivoted. I'm going to talk about something else, but I was going to talk a little bit about Drew Timmy's NBA potential, and we already kind of covered that. So I pivoted. So we'll see if I'm as prepared because I'm changing topics.
Mustachio.
Yes.
Only so much mustache talk. All right.
Exactly.
3, 2, 1, go.
Joel Ayayi will be a mid-second round pick, and whichever team gets him is going to be thrilled because he is a phenomenal rebounding guard. He's a better passer than people think that he is. And while his defense is questionable at times, I think he's going to develop into a really, really good role-playing backup point guard in the NBA. And whichever team drafts him in the mid to late second round is going to be really, really happy with the production they get out of him.
Dang, for the first time ever on the show, Andy, that was very well timed. Very, very well timed.
I was looking right at it, so that helps.
All right. So before we let you out of here, let's talk to me. Where can people find you, Andy? Obviously, you got the show, which is available wherever people get their podcasts, called Score Zags Score. But where can people find you and talk to you about what they got to do?
Yeah, so you can find the Twitter account for my podcast is at Score Zags Score. That's where I tweet most of the Gonzaga related news, updates, things like that. You can follow me personally on Twitter at Andy Patton PNW. I write for pitcherlist.com. I do a lot of fantasy baseball stuff for them. So if you're interested in that, you can follow me there, and I'll have a lot of content there, and obviously content about the Seattle Mariners. I also have a Mariners podcast that I do. I should plug that now too. It's called Never Sunny in Seattle. It comes out once a week with my good friend Mikey, and you can follow that at NSIS Pod on Twitter, and you can follow me on Twitter, like I said, and you can find the podcast on Facebook and Instagram as well at Score Zags Score.
Perfect, man. Go follow it. It's got all your Gonzaga needs. He's very active with the podcast Twitter. At least I'm not a huge baseball guy, so the Mariners, but with the Gonzaga one, you're certainly very much interactive. You can follow me and my personal stuff at Painsworth512. I've got another show called F&, Sports. It's wherever you get your podcast. Obviously, you find your way to Midweek Midrange. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at Midweek Midrange, all one word. And then obviously go subscribe to YouTube, download, etc. We love that. And thank you guys for pulling up. Take care.